Okay, evening folks, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Mark Beggs. I'm not a Davis facilitator. I'm actually dyslexic and the father of a child who is also dyslexic and who has gone through the program, the Davis program many years ago. So that's why I'm just on to just to tell everybody just a few little things about tonight. When Richard is finished, we're going to have a virtual coffee link put up so that if you'd like to join us for a virtual coffee, just if you have any questions you don't want to ask during the main webinar and you want to ask them maybe on a one-to-one basis, you're more than welcome to join us. We also have Martha. So Martha's going to, if you have any questions during the webinar and you want to put them up in the chat, Martha will do her best to answer them or maybe bring them forward to the virtual coffee if we feel that's the best way to go. Also, if anyone just leaves us early, just to say to you, on our website, there's a form you can fill in if you would like a free 15 or 30-minute free telephone conversation with us. You'll be having a talk with one of our 35 facilitators all over Ireland and the UK. The good thing about this is many of these facilitators either have children or family members who have done the program, and that's why they became facilitators, or some of them have actually done the program themselves. So you may have certain worries or certain challenges. You're going to be talking to like-minded people who have the experience of having someone who's dyslexic in the family or been dyslexic themselves. So, and then lastly, I'm going to introduce you to Richard Whitehead, who's going to run the webinar tonight. I'm going to read this out, but Richard, because Richard has been busy. He has a lot of stuff behind him. So if I make any mistakes, my apologies, folks. So first of all, Richard is the author of a book called Why Tyrannosaurus Not If. It's a dyslexic blueprint for the future of education. And anyone who hasn't read it yet should, because it's a fantastic book to actually have. He's a PATOS accredited SPLD assessor and a former SENCO. He's also a director and the principal trainer for Davis UK and Ireland, and has delivered one-to-one programs since 2002, including one to my son. Richard has presented the Davis method on 5 continents and has conducted webinars and lectures on multisensory learning for Operation University, the University of Chester, Jamia Millia Islamabad University, New Delhi, the University of South Africa, and the SEND Group, as well as regularly for Davis, UK, and Ireland. He's also been a guest speaker for the last 3 years at the Dyslexia Show, which is the #1 top dyslexia show in Ireland, in the UK. And Richard's second book, which is focused on maths, is called Counting on Fingers: Why Some Bright and Creative People Struggle with Numbers and Mathematics, and How That Can Be Changed. And that was published in October 2023. And it's also one of those books, if you want to have 3 books in your arsenal: Richard's first book, Why Tyrannosaurus Not If, Counting on Fingers, and The Gift of Dyslexia by Ron Davis. There are 3 books that you should have on your shelf as a must if you have someone who's dyslexic in the family, or even yourself. Okay, well, we'll kick off. Richard, I'll hand over to yourself to kick tonight off.
Wonderful, great. Thanks very much, Mark. So I'll bring the screen up in a moment. A couple of practical things before we start. Out here in leafy Malvern in Worcestershire, we had a slight Wi-Fi glitch, or an internet glitch, earlier this evening when I was a little bit blurry and jerky. I'm hoping I'm okay now. Mark and Marta, am I looking okay to you? As okay as I ever do?
Yep, it's still a bit glitchy, but you're okay.
Okay, all right. A little bit glitchy, okay. And it seemed to be particularly an issue on a couple of videos we were trying to show you. So we're keeping our fingers crossed, pixelated. All right. We're keeping our fingers crossed it will settle down. And we'll be able to move smoothly through the evening. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that when you're in a Zoom webinar, it's a bit different from a Zoom meeting, in case you've experienced the one but not the other. At the bottom of your Zoom panel, you should be familiar with the chat button, where I know that a lot of you are, because a lot of you have already chatted in it. It's like that speech bubble button that says chat. and we've got the numbers appearing when people post new things. But there's also a mysterious little double speech bubble called Q&A. So use the Q&A button for any question that you want answered at the end. Okay, so at the end of the webinar, we'll be working through the questions in Q&A. So chat is more for kind of gossip as we're going along. Yeah, don't like his hairstyle, that sort of thing. Okay, whereas Q&A is for if you have something that you actually want to be answered, they will sort of stack up there in the course of the webinar, and at the end we'll then move through them one by one. Okay, so let's make a start. Is this showing okay? It's still loading. Is this showing okay? Great.
It is.
Okay, so we're here this evening. Wonderful. Thanks, folks. So we're here this evening to talk to you about how dyslexia works. We're going to be unraveling the mystery of a learning difference so that reading can be easy. So a little word about us. Mark has very kindly introduced me at the beginning of this evening's webinar. This is us in Davis, UK and Ireland. This is just the total team of our expert facilitators who work one-to-one with individuals with dyslexia, dyscalculia, ADHD, dyspraxia, right across the nations of the UK and Ireland. And we also have somebody who has a base in Guernsey as well, for the person here from Guernsey. So we've got good coverage kind of right through all of the nations of these islands. Okay. And now we want to find out a little bit about you. We're going to launch what's called a poll. You're going to see in a moment something flashing up on your screen, which is just a little questionnaire. And we would love it if, here it comes, we would love it if you could just answer the questions that you see up there. So we're asking you, first of all, how did you find out about this webinar? Really useful for us to know that. And also just a little bit about what brings you here. So whether you're here out of personal interest, as a parent, as a professional, looking for a new career, some combination of all of that, or indeed as a Davis facilitator. Okay, so if you can fill that in for us, that would be extremely valuable as we move on forward. And I'm just gonna wait a moment for that to fill in, because I will need your full attention for the next piece.
Please scroll down the poll. It's not only one screen. You have a possibility to scroll down.
Somebody's here from the Isle of Man. Yes, you can scroll down as well. You can scroll up and down. Somebody's here from the Isle of Man, and we also have a colleague who works in the Isle of Man. So you can't catch us out on anywhere. Great. We don't have anyone in Jersey yet, but we'll come if you want us to. Okay. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for all of you who are filling this in. So I'm just going to gently move on and show you a little bit more about what Mark was telling us about earlier. Okay, so Mark mentioned that there's going to be a coffee meeting after this meeting, and the way that it works. So what this is, it's like our attempt to replicate the way it would have been in the olden days, where we would have perhaps hired a conference hall or a church hall or whatever it might have been, and you would have come in and you would have sat politely listening to one of us speaking. And then at the end, there would have been coffee and everyone would have mingled, and you would have a chance to then have a more informal chat with each other and with whoever was the speaker. And that's something that we've kind of lost in the webinar culture. So we're putting it back. And the way that we're putting it back is through what we call a virtual coffee meeting. Some of you might have experienced these already. Feel free to drop into the chat if you have done. But what will happen is at the end of the webinar, with due warning, I will close the webinar and I will then open up a separate Zoom meeting. Okay, the link to that Zoom meeting is on the web page that I've just put into the chat. No, it isn't. Ignore that one. That is the wrong one. Okay, it is. Ooh, that's interesting. My thingy isn't working very well. Sorry about this. Okay, so that's just gone into the chat, and that will go into the chat again at the end of the webinar. Okay, so it's just davismethod.co.uk/coffee meeting. And then when you open up that page, please don't leave the meeting and open it up now. But when you open it up, you'll see that there's a kind of a little button on there. When you click that button, it opens up a Zoom link, which will take you in to the coffee meeting. And the coffee meeting is an unrecorded, camera on experience where you just come in and you can chat with us and we can chat with you. Okay, and it's a lovely informal chance to meet with a group of us facilitators, you know, ask perhaps some more in-depth questions, do a bit of back and forth, to and fro. Okay, so that will open up as soon as the actual webinar itself is finished. Okay, we've got a hand raised. One participant's raised her hand. Boom, boom, boom. I think if you can perhaps just drop into the chat what you need to tell us, that would be probably the best thing for now, hoping that that's okay. If it isn't, then we'll have to figure out what to do. Okay, and towards the end of the webinar, we put out this little tantalizing announcement last night and an hour ago that we're going to be making a kind of a special offer to you, okay, which will represent a very significant saving on one of our flagship services. So we're going to park that for now, but towards the end of the webinar, I'll be telling you more about what this is. It's a very exciting new launch of a service that we're looking at, and you're going to be the first people to see that this evening. Okay, so more on that very shortly. Okay. Now, dyslexia. Traditionally, dyslexia has been thought of as a disability. So here we're seeing the British Dyslexia Association definition of dyslexia as a learning difficulty that primarily affects the skills involved in accurate and fluent word reading and spelling, difficulties in phonological awareness, verbal memory, and verbal processing speed. Literally a couple of weeks ago, a new definition came out from what's called the Delphi study. I'm not going to read everything that's on the screen here, but if you just glance through it, again, you'll see it's a disability framework for understanding dyslexia. Okay, sometimes lip service is paid to certain strengths. Okay, but essentially we're looking at dyslexia as a set of processing difficulties here. Okay, so it's not surprising that when Ron Davis wrote his first book, The Gift of Dyslexia, that Mark referred to earlier, and that was just under, well, exactly 30 years now, he encountered resistance and astonishment at the idea that dyslexia could stem from a perceptual talent, because the existing framework for understanding dyslexia was so firmly rooted in the idea that it was purely a disability. Some people even took offense, thinking that the very real pain of a dyslexic learning difficulty was being airbrushed away by the claim that dyslexia was a gift. In reality, anyone familiar with Ron's own history, which included beatings, bullying attacks, and being left in the corner for hours on end at school, would know that this was far from Ron's intention. And nowadays, a quick search on Google, Pinterest, or YouTube shows that celebration of dyslexic talent abounds. The idea of dyslexic giftedness has become mainstream. And yet, the now mainstream recognition of dyslexic talent frequently still misses a trick. Often, famous dyslexics are held up as a kind of comfort blanket for the dyslexic child who's struggling at school. So it's like, okay, you find it difficult to read and write, but so did Tom Cruise. Yeah, so never mind. And famous dyslexics are typically showcased as people who have succeeded despite their dyslexia. But in the Davis approach, we see this differently. We see dyslexics as having succeeded because of their dyslexia. We see dyslexia as the primary thinking tool, the intellectual capital of the dyslexic individual. And this understanding opens up a whole new way of helping dyslexic individuals to learn. And we're not the only people to have reached this conclusion. I have read out this quote before, and I make no apologies for doing so because I absolutely love it. This is a quote by neurologist Dr. Fernette Eide, co-author of The Dyslexic Advantage and co-founder of the charity by the same name. And Dr. Eide says, it's a huge mistake to regard a dyslexic child as if his or her brain is trying to follow the same pathway of development as all the other kids, but is simply doing a bad job of it. In reality, the brains of kids with dyslexic processing styles are actually developing in a very different way. They establish a different pattern of connections and circuitry, creating a different kind of problem-solving apparatus. The difference is global, not just in certain areas of the brain. And if any of you want to look up, the article that's on the Dyslexic Advantage blog at the bottom of the page, you'll find that there's a whole list there of dyslexic thinking strengths and different and specifically dyslexic forms of reasoning, if you like, in which dyslexic individuals abound in ways that others don't. Okay. Okay, so here's an example of dyslexic intelligence. So one of the elements of a Davis Dyslexia program is a process of making creative models showing the meanings of the common abstract words of language. This enhances fluency of reading. Here you see a model made by 7-year-old Charlie. He's not 7 now, but he was when he made the model. And it's the model for the word now. The definition of now is in the present moment. So what did Charlie do? He made a model of himself making a model of now. Don't know if you can see that in the picture. Yeah. So his example is now I am making a model of now. Okay. And this is a great example of the heightened pictorial logic that even quite young dyslexic children can sometimes exhibit. So when supporting the learning of a dyslexic individual, seeing dyslexia as a talent opens up a new mindset. If we see dyslexia as a disability, then our role as a parent or an educator is solely to provide coping strategies, crutches, and props. We see our role as doing for the dyslexic person what they can't do for themselves, and what we assume they will never be able to do, or as showing them tricks so that they can get round what we assume to be a lifelong learning disability. We become the person supplying answers for a person who can't find them for themselves. But when we see dyslexia as a talent, this changes our approach fundamentally. Recognizing a dyslexic individual as differently able with their own perceptual talents starts to make us curious about how the individual thinks and how the individual learns. We start to see ourselves not as a teacher or advice giver, but as a facilitator of the individual's learning. We start to recognize that the answers to the individual's learning difficulties lie not in us, but in the individual themselves. And we start to see that our job isn't to be the person with the right answers. It's to be the person with the right questions. So be warned, here comes a bit of technical stuff now. Because to understand the gift of dyslexia, we need to understand 3 puzzle pieces that are present both in the talent aspect and in the difficulty aspect of dyslexia. Davis identifies these 3 puzzle pieces as picture thinking, being expert at something we call disorientation, and having a low tolerance for confusion. We'll now look at each of these elements in more detail. So it's generally accepted that human beings have 2 fundamentally different ways of thinking. Okay. One of these we might call word thinking. Okay. Word thinking is essentially talking to yourself in your mind. It's the kind of mental script with which many non-dyslexics overlay their thinking processes. Picture thinking, on the other hand, is the ability to think directly in mental imagery without the intermediary of word thinking. So, for example, if you're traveling to your great aunt to celebrate her 90th birthday, and on the way you think about all the nice things you want to say to her, then you might well find yourself doing word thinking, like you're rehearsing what you're going to say in your mind. On the other hand, let's say you're walking down the road and a car driver pulls over, winds down the window and asks you how to get to a particular address. And you say, right, okay, so you need to drive onto the next traffic light, then you turn left, then you pass a wine shop on your right, then you take the next right, you drive over a humpback bridge, and so on. You're probably doing picture thinking. It's like you're picturing the route, right? And your mental images are providing you directly with the words that you need to give the driver directions. So let's take a look now at how, so if this idea makes sense of picture thinking as thinking directly in mental imagery, and word thinking as thinking with the sounds of words in our mind, okay? Let's take a look now at how word thinkers and picture thinkers differ when they read. Now, it's kind of a common knowledge that every word that exists has three parts. Every word that exists must have a way of being spelt. It must be possible to write it down, yeah, in a literary language, okay? So that's what we're seeing bottom left, what a word looks like when it's written on the page. Every word that exists must also be able to be spoken. So every word that exists must also have a sound. And that's what's represented bottom right, what it sounds like. But we don't just talk gibberish and nonsense, at least most of the time. I hope I don't. So every word that exists also must have a meaning. And the meaning is the part that we can picture using our picture thinking, using our mental imagery. So the word on the screen, you're seeing on the left, bottom left, the spelling of the word Tyrannosaurus. Bottom right represents what it sounds like when it's spoken, Tyrannosaurus. On the top, you're seeing the meaning of the word that represents the meaning of the word Tyrannosaurus. Okay. Okay. So if every word has three parts in this way, then when we're reading, we're looking at what the word looks like on the page. Okay, you're seeing bottom left. And if we're looking at what the word looks like, we've got a couple of options there as to where our mind goes next. So let's look first of all at what happens, what we know happens with a word thinker. A non-dyslexic, word-thinking child, or later adult, who's responded well and quickly to traditional phonic reading intervention. Now, what are phonics? Phonics is an approach to reading that intentionally links letters as they're seen on the page to sounds as they're spoken by a person's mouth. Yeah? Then groups of letters are put together to form groups of sounds known as blending. Then you look at syllables, and gradually you're building up in an ability to see a word and, as it were, to hear a word in your mind. That's the whole point of phonics, if you think about it, because the whole thrust of phonics is linking graphemes, letters on the page, to phonemes, speech sounds. So the word-thinking child who's got good at thinking with the sounds of words in their mind goes into school, they're being taught that way, and it's easy for them. Ah, okay. So that child, they see the word Tyrannosaurus on the page, they switch on their word thinking, and it's like a little voice in the head goes, Tyrannosaurus. But if they're a native speaker and they know the language and they've come across that word, they'll be able to get from that Tyrannosaurus to the mental picture of what it means. So they'll be understanding what they're reading. Now let's look at the dyslexic way. A dyslexic individual, a bright, curious, explorative, imaginative picture thinker. Okay, so this child is coming into school. This child doesn't really do word thinking. They don't really think with the sounds of words in their mind. They think in pictures. So they see the word Tyrannosaurus. Their mind isn't going to go, Tyrannosaurus. It's going to go, Wah. Okay, it's going to go straight to the picture. But again, if they're a native speaker of their language and they've got that picture of that thing that goes, Wah, yeah, then they can say the word Tyrannosaurus pretty fluently. And neither they nor the outside world are going to know what was different about how they read and the other child read, until we get to the little common words of language. So if you think about the word if, yeah? If I say Tyrannosaurus and you've come across it, you can probably picture it, right? If I say elephant, you can probably picture it. If I say surprise or jump or waterfall, you probably get a picture or a feeling or some sort of sensory input for those words. But if's just a blank, right? Yeah. And the same would apply to words like the, and, but, how, when, why, whoever, which, is. And some of the most common and smallest words in the language are blank pictures. So what happens there if I'm a picture thinker? I'm seeing the word if, and I get a blank. The feeling, by the way, that comes with a blank is the feeling of confusion. A blank mental picture is like, what is that? Okay, I don't get it. So if I've got nothing in the meaning box, how on earth am I going to be able to say the word right? And time again, I see this time and time again as a diagnostic assessor, as well as a Davis facilitator. We see dyslexic individuals who stumble on the small common words of language far more than they do on some of the much less common, much longer words. And to illustrate this point, I'm going to play you a little excerpt from a reading analysis, an oral reading analysis that I conducted as a diagnostic assessor with a 14-year-old boy some while ago. And you'll see in the annotations here, I've underlined the fluency issues that are occurring. O is omission, H is hesitation, C is correction. And just look and listen to what happens here.
By lunchtime, I felt really upset and was missing all my friends at school. And Maria. I remember sitting down on the grass under a large shady tree and wondering what they were all up to. Fortunately, though, a boy from my class came over. We got chatting. His name was Toby, and he was quite small and short and with short dark hair, and the habit of staring open-mouthed at things occasionally. But he was harmless, and he was a good listener.
How are you feeling?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. We talked about many things, such as my old school, the girls there, the girls here, where my new house was, and how well we were settling in. The girls who lived round about me. The weather. Oh right, okay. The most popular places to hang out at the weekends, and you had the most chance of seeing the girls.
So just look at what happens there. What's really striking is that we've got long, more complex words like lunchtime, remember, wondering, fortunately, occasionally, harmless, listener, popular, weekends. And did you hear that it was like, on those words, it was like this boy didn't have a reading difficulty. They were fluent, they were confident, they were accurate. And the majority of the mistakes, the vast majority of the mistakes are on these words like my, and, was again, with, had, we, the, where. Yeah? Where was just not there. 5-letter word just, didn't exist in this boy's perception when he was reading. So this is the kind of empirical evidence that we have of dyslexic individuals as being specialists in picture thinking and having a high incidence of error on the words that don't create a mental image. Now, there's a way we work with this in Davis, which we're going to be looking at later in the session. And dyslexics will thrive when learning actively by doing, but they will respond less well to passive learning methods, such as listening to oral explanations or chalk and talk and memorization. And also, much traditional reading instruction is very passive in you know, naturally passive, if you like, in the way that it works, and you know, and the way that things are assimilated. And now I'm going to attempt to play for you. I'm going to pray this is going to work out okay. Have I just blurred the screen up? I have. Okay, well, hopefully you'll be able to get the sound of this. This is just a group of Davis facilitators who are many of our facilitators are also, you know, started out in their journey into Davis as parents of dyslexic individuals, okay, whose children experienced the Davis program and then decided they wanted to train in order to help others. And what we have here is a few different accounts of how my colleagues' children experienced sort of some of the more traditional reading teaching.
If your child's been having phonics
Does it
for
sound
years
okay?
and they're still not reading and they're struggling, then it's time to try a different approach.
I was diagnosed dyslexic when I was younger. I did phonics and I couldn't read, and I did more phonics and I still couldn't read. And then when I was 15 I did Davis and I read my first book from cover to cover that summer after I did my Davis dyslexia program, and it was a revelation.
I came to Davis because of my two sons who were struggling at school.
I started because my son was diagnosed as dyslexic when he was about 7.
I have a son who's dyslexic, dyspraxic, autistic and dyscalcular. Davis isn't just to help with the reading or the maths. Davis is a way of learning that will take them through to university and beyond. And it will absolutely change their life.
Because they were not achieving phonic-wise, they were being moved down the sets. I came across the book Gift of Dyslexia. I implemented much of the book. It worked. It helped my children to focus better. They've achieved really, really well. Both are highly academic people and at the top of their fields at the moment.
And we were advised by professionals to do phonics training. And I didn't know that there were any other options. So for 2 years, I drilled him in phonics. I don't know why I'm laughing. They were dark years in our family. We were told at the time that he was damaged goods, that we should put him into a special school. We did none of that. Then I discovered Davis, just quite by chance. And it was like a light bulb moment. So we stopped all remedial and I trained in order to give my son the Davis program, and he got a first degree from Bristol University in engineering, and a lot of that is due to the change that we turned around when he did his Davis stuff.
My son was diagnosed with dyslexia when he was 8 years old. He'd been completely Montessori educated from being 2, so I knew he had a really good phonic instruction, but he was just stuck. So I did a massive amount of research and then I decided just to go with the Davis first. And it had such a big, massive impact. He did the programme in October. By the summer, he was then reading age-appropriate books.
Okay, so moving on. The second of the puzzle pieces is what in Davis we call disorientation. On top of being picture thinkers, dyslexics tend to be expert at this function. Disorientation is your mind's ability to experience its imagination as if that were reality. So, for example, if you've ever sat in a stationary vehicle, like a train, and there was another vehicle next to it, like another train on the next platform, which started moving, then you might have felt as if it was you that was moving. And in that moment, it's not you're making it up, it's like you feel as if you're really, really moving. I remember an occasion when I was backing into a parking space with a wall behind me. There was a van next to me that pulled forward just as I was backing it, and I was pumping on the brakes frantically, like the brakes aren't working, because I felt with my whole body as if I was moving when I wasn't. Okay? So that's an example of what in Davis we call disorientation. It's a state in which your mind can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. Is the screen clear, folks? Yeah, okay. So seeing this screen, it might look as if the spirals are moving. But they're not. It's an optical illusion. Okay? It's your mind that's generating the experience of movement and making it feel as if it's real, when actually there is none. And if you look at it for long enough, you might start experiencing a bit of motion sickness. I'll take it off the screen in a moment, but you can drop into the chat if you are. Okay? And if you're seeing this moving or you're feeling a bit queasy, you're experiencing disorientation. And just as you experience disorientation here, and praying this doesn't blur, we'll have to see what happens. Okay. I don't know if this is visible, but it's common knowledge that many dyslexic individuals perceive imagined movement when reading. It's like the words are moving around or blurring. Some people will say they crawl off the page and they crawl over the table and they jump onto the floor even. And it's not the person's kind of engaging in make-believe. That is what's actually happening in the person's perception. Because disorientation is presenting what your mind's creating as if that were actual reality. Okay, now what is disorientation? Disorientation is a natural reaction to confusion, and it's a creative problem-solving talent. So when you're not getting an answer from what your eyes are seeing, you may need to twist, turn, or otherwise change what you're seeing in your mind until it makes sense. Dyslexics tend to be very good at this creative disorientation function, and they automatically deploy it whenever they experience confusion. As a result, dyslexics learn to disorientate very quickly and readily in response to the feeling of confusion. And this is something that in Davis we call a low threshold for confusion. It's like a low tolerance for confusion. Okay? As an asset, it can make a dyslexic individual get to an answer, and often a right one, at intuitive speed. As a liability, it can prevent a dyslexic individual from staying mentally present when confronted with information that doesn't fully make sense. So what happens to our bright, picture-thinking, confusion-sensitive expert in disorientation to turn a perceptual talent into a learning disability? Well, a poignant sequence of events has to take place that Ron Davis calls the anatomy of a learning disability. First, the individual has to be confronted with an unrecognized stimulus, or usually lots of them. And the first such set of stimuli that our bright picture-thinking child encounters may well be the letters of the alphabet at school. And it doesn't help then that they're being told that each letter is a sound. So they're being told that S is S. Ooh, what's a S? What does that taste like? What do I do with it? Where do I put it? Yeah, I'm not a word thinker. What does that even mean? Okay. C is K, or curly K. And then there's a kicking K as well, and so on. But if I'm not a word thinker, that just doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm confronted with these unrecognized stimuli. And the lack of recognition causes a feeling of confusion. The confusion brings about disorientation because I have a low threshold for confusion, don't I? Okay, so it doesn't take much confusion to tip me into disorientation. And although my creative disorientations work really well to figure out what things are in the real world, they don't help me recognize a two-dimensional letter. It's like picturing a building from all angles as an adult could make me a successful architect. But picturing a letter from all angles will make me dyslexic. And now that I'm disorientated, the chances are that I will take in the information incorrectly. It's a bit like if you're at a social function, if you've ever had it like somebody introduces themselves as Luke, for example, and you later on you're thinking, did he say Luke or did he say John? And you kind of spend the whole evening just saying you to that person out of embarrassment that you're worried you're going to not say their name right. So it's the same thing. When you were being introduced to the person, you probably disorientated, and your mind made an alternate experience of what the person had said their name was. Later, when you're trying to consult back to your memory, they were both real because the disorientation made them both real at the time. Yeah. And so then what happens to the child in school who's had that happening with S, for example, is you get something that we call a mistake. Okay, so when I need to reproduce the information, like to write the S in this example, I'll make a mistake. And now, over time, as the mistakes compound, I become frustrated. I'm a bright individual in an environment where I'm constantly feeling as if I was stupid. I have a problem, but I have no idea why I do, where it is coming from, or how to resolve it. And once I'm feeling frustrated, I'll be ready to adopt something that in Davis we call compulsive solutions, coping strategies, tricks, ways around the issue. For example, someone tells me that if I imagine the word smile on a smile, the bottom of the S will blend in with the smile properly if I get it the right way round. Ah, okay. And suddenly I stop reversing my S. And everyone thinks I'm making progress. It says so on the report card. Yeah, I've stopped reversing my S's. Great, progress. But in reality, I've clogged up my thinking and I've created a dependency. Because from now on, every time I write an S, I'm going to have to think of that picture with a smile on it in order. It's not, I don't know the S, I know the picture, and the picture knows the S. So I've kind of garbaged up my mind with something that, with an extra piece that other people don't need. And the more of these compulsive solutions I take on, the more learning disabled I become. Why? Because the compulsive solution blocks alternative experiences. Take the finger trick for the 9 times table. If you've come across that one, where you kind of put a thumb or a finger down, and then the digits to the left are the 10s and the digits to the right are the 1s. And it's quite common when I'm giving a Davis maths program that the child I'm working with will say, oh, I know my 9s, and will then hide their hands under the table. And then, you kind of know that it's a finger trick that's going on, okay? So does that child know their 9 times table? Well, they know the finger trick, and the finger trick knows the 9 times table. But the child doesn't really understand the 9 times table, or for that matter, multiplication. So now, when I need to do a division involving 9, like 27 divided by 9, I'm not going to know where to start. Whereas if I'd mastered multiplication, and I'd mastered the 9s, then division would be a baby step, and would be easy. Okay, so it's like the compulsive solution blocks alternative experiences. You can't go the other way with it. You can't come in from any or whatever angle you want to. You have to always go the same way. It's a rigid solution. And so it is that a dyslexic child who perhaps couldn't read at all, through deploying compulsive solutions, becomes a dyslexic adult who can kind of read, but is a slow reader, often has to reread material multiple times, and has low reading stamina. The compulsive solutions are provided for a basic reading ability, but I'm unlikely ever to read for pleasure because reading is the opposite of pleasure, basically. And compulsive solutions can take many different forms. What they all have in common is that they mask the underlying difficulty while making the individual dependent on them. So in essence, they block alternative learning experiences. But when dyslexia is able to manifest as a gift, the opposite occurs. Davis sees the gift of dyslexia as the gift of mastery. Mastery is high-quality experiential learning that does not rely on rote learning, drill, or repetition. In the words of Ron Davis, when someone masters something, it becomes a part of that person. It becomes part of the individual's thought and creative process. It adds the quality of its essence to all subsequent thought and creativity of the individual. So I'm going to summarize some of the key Davis techniques now. So you'll get some sort of basic practical insights into how we work and what the elements are. If you want to go deeper, then Mark mentioned Ron Davis's book, The Gift of Dyslexia, at the start of the webinar. Getting hold of a copy of that, you will be able to access complete scripts for every single one of the Davis procedures and be able to try them out at home. There then are also other ways you can access Davis through a self-help kit, through attending a workshop, or kind of the gold star option through accessing a program through a Davis facilitator. And I'll be saying more about that at the end of the webinar. But to get you started, the Gift of Dyslexia book is a really good place to start. Okay, so in a Davis program, we have a kind of a unique guided process that teaches an individual how to turn off a disorientation instantly at will. Okay, you disorientate, you notice, click, you turn it off, using this mental tool that was developed by Ron Davis out of the experiences of his own dyslexia and the correction of it. Okay, and once the individual has this set of mental tools, they make all of the letters of the alphabet in clay. Then they use their, what we call their orientation tool, their mental tool, to identify any letters that their mind didn't comfortably assimilate when they were originally learning to read. It's like these little irritants have stuck in the mind, like itching powder, mental itching powder, as it were, that have attached themselves to, to individual letters, as well as to some words and to punctuation marks. And when you're reading, they're constantly knocking on your focus and trying to knock you out of focus. So essentially, these letters are provoking disorientation in an individual. And in Davis, we call that triggers. So the individual is guided in the program to eliminate the triggers. Then, once none of the letters provoke disorientation anymore, the individual, the child or the adult, is able to name the letters forwards and backwards with their eyes closed from a mental picture. Now, many of our clients go home being aware then that they can do something that their parents can't do, which is to say the alphabet backwards with their eyes closed. Okay? And that gives a huge boost to self-esteem. But what's important is the reason why they can do it is because the triggers have gone. So none of the letters are now causing disorientation. So you can form a crystal clear image of each letter using your picture thinking. And then you can use that in order to build up your word recognition in reading and your proficiency in spelling as we then move into the later stages of the program. So it gives a big leg up right at the start of the program to the reading process. Reading itself is then built up through a series of targeted non-phonic exercises that enable a word to be seen consistently as a sequence of letters from left to right. This is a technique known as spell reading, followed by sweep, sweep, spell, where an individual gradually reveals a word from left to right using a set of two cards, one covering up the words underneath, the other to reveal the letters. And you then get to train your mind to work like a scanner or a photocopier. You know, that beam of light goes whoop, from left to right, as opposed to as a camera trying to take it all in at once, which is how our eyes naturally work. So that gently builds up consistency of left to right scanning of words and accurate perception of what's where in a word. A word essentially is a sequence of letters that goes from left to right. Okay, so a starting point in any reading tuition needs to be able to recognize that. Right? And then we also have a special focus on mastering those high-frequency abstract words I was talking about earlier, such as next, or now rather, from, between, while. Okay. Now these words actually make up around 60% of the words that we see on a typical page. Dyslexics frequently stumble on these words when reading, as we saw earlier in the passage I showed to you. Yeah, they cause disorientation because there's no meaning picture attached to them. And again, so as you see here, using plasticine clay, the dyslexic individual can create a model that switches on a picture for these words and eliminates the confusion that they had been causing. Mastery often requires digging deep down into the essence of what you're learning, rather than skimming around on the surface. Okay, as an example of this, 16 years ago, I conducted a Davis Maths Mastery program with a 13-year-old dyslexic girl who, among other things, struggled to remember the months of the year. One of the things that we do in a Davis Maths program is to explore the concept of time. In the course of doing so, we used a globe and a light to explore how the Earth's orbit around the sun on a tilted axis creates the seasons of the year. We were then able to see the Earth's orbit around the sun essentially as an enormous calendar, with every date as being a position on the orbital path. And so it goes on until we get back round to the beginning. And once we get back round to where we started, it's been a year. And this culminated in a model for the idea of time as the way that we measure change in relation to a standard. Here we see a plant growing. To measure how long it takes, we use a calendar, And the Earth's orbit around the sun is the standard that determines the date that shows on every single calendar in the world. Later in the program, we used this idea to lay out the position of the Earth on its orbital path for every month of the year. And on each of these 12 models of the Earth, the girl showed the north. It's a little bit difficult to see in this photo, but she's showing the north-south axis, the equator, and a dot to mark where we were in the UK. And up to that point, the names of the months had just been that, names, with no meaning attached. And then if there's no meaning, there's no picture. Now she could map the months onto her new understanding of the Earth's orbital path around the sun. As you can see here, she made the name of each month out of clay, a core element of the Davis approach. Then she looked at, touched, and said the name of each month going from January to December. After that, she did the same thing in backwards order. Finally, she closed her eyes, pictured what she'd created on the table, and named each of the months forwards and backwards with her eyes closed from her mental image, and then she knew them. This creative investigative approach works across many areas of learning. I've done work of this kind with many dyslexic Year 10 pupils, like 14, 15-year-olds, who had been very confused by the structure of an atom. The pupil makes the model themselves under my general guidance. Here we see a model using balance scales to illustrate metaphorically that a proton has the same mass as a neutron. And the other part of the model is showing that the proton and the neutron are in the nucleus. So Davis facilitators have a whole suite of programs available to help you or your child. Davis Dyslexia facilitators can help master reading and writing, maths and numeracy, and attention focus, as well as helping individuals under the age of 8 with a program called Davis Foundations for Reading. So those are the top 4 programs that you see on the screen. Davis Autism Approach facilitators and coaches offer programs addressing the difficulties experienced by both verbal and non-verbal autistic individuals, and to improve executive function for non-autistic individuals. So that's the 4 bottom Davis solutions that you see on the screen. But now, also, here comes Davis Parent Power for dyslexia. So alongside the Davis programs I just showed to you, I'm delighted to announce that we're offering a 6-part live coaching course for parents of bright but struggling dyslexic learners, conducted over 6 weekly 2-hour sessions live on Zoom. Davis Parent Power Dyslexia is an empowerment course for the people who care most about bright but struggling dyslexic children, their parents. Our 4 decades in the field of neurodiversity, led by our dyslexic founder, Ron Davis, have given us unique insights into the delicate interplay between talent and difficulty in dyslexia, and crucially, how to overcome these challenges. So you won't be able to read what's on the screen here, but this just is a little overview of the content of the 6 weeks of the course. The purpose of this course is not to show you how to correct your child's reading and or writing problem. The purpose of this course is to show you how to be the best helper that you can for your bright picture thinking child when they're struggling with their school subject learning. So it's like, Mum, I've got a geography test tomorrow, I'm going to crash. Dad, I don't get what chemistry is all about. Yeah? I can't remember the dates in history. The teacher doesn't make sense when they're talking to me about the subjects. Okay? And this will give you a set of, it'll equip you with a set of key Davis tools that you can use with your child in order to solve that eternal problem of, gosh, my child's struggling with their homework. What do I do? Do I just leave them to sink or swim? Or do I write the geography project for them? Or what's the middle space between that? What can I do that will actually empower my child to be able to learn for themselves? Okay. So there are further details on the website. I'm just going to hope that this works as a video. Okay. At least the sound, and you're going to hear now just the parent of a former course participant talking about, this was her son was 9 at the time that she attended this course. This was her first experience with Davis, and she's talking here about what the course gave to her and to her son.
the first thing that I found exceptionally useful was to understand how Miles reads or doesn't read, or what he sees because of his dyslexia. And then, of course, how very quickly over the course of only 6 weeks did I appreciate that I was suddenly equipped with so many tools to be able to help him to speed up the learning, where it took away a load of stress for him and for me. We started seeing immediate results, only implementing a tiny proportion of what could be done. Going through some of the exercises as a parent and being able to then implement what you learn, but also seeing across the group of people and parents that were on the course, how quickly and easily it works. So as soon as he started using plasticine actively to learn his weekly spelling, we saw a huge improvement, and he suddenly went from 2 words to 4 words to 6 words to getting all of them correct. Yeah, and how fast it started happening. Calmed me right down, our relationship improved, and I think that we have something really special together by having done and implemented all of these various tools that we can use to be able to learn and progress, which is what I really wanted for him.
So here goes. At the beginning, I told you we were going to be, sorry, I'll just change the way the screen's up. We were going to be offering you something towards the end of this webinar. And so here goes, because this is the essentially the launch of Davis Parent Powered Dyslexia under the new way that we're conducting Davis in the UK. We want to start off with a bang, in the best possible sense. Okay, so the first Davis Parent Powered Dyslexia course is going to be offered by me personally. Okay, it's going to run from the 29th of August to the 3rd of October. Okay, what that means is if you're in the UK, or I think the same in Ireland, it will be in the week after the Bank Holiday Monday, just before, a little bit different in Scotland, but in England and Wales, it'll be just a little bit before the start of term. So you'll have one session probably before the start of term so that you can hit the ground running when your child starts school. And then as your child then goes through the first few weeks of their new academic year, you'll be gradually upskilling through the remaining parts of the course so that you'll be able to, enrich yourself with more and more insights, strategies, and support to help your child through, through the first month of the new academic year. Now, the normal price for Davis Parent Powered Dyslexia is £475. That's for the 6 sessions, the kit, which comprises plasticine clay, a complete instruction manual, 2 books. For the launch, we would like to offer for this course 24 people, because that's all we're going to take for this course, the opportunity to attend for £295. And if your other half wants to attend as well, they can attend for half of that price. Okay, but that's only until the close of Sunday. Okay, we're rushing a little bit here because we need to know that this course is a goer, and we're going to hit the ground running with it. We'll be able to get the materials out to you quickly. You can start familiarizing yourself with the course materials and the books, ready then for the course to start in earnest from the end of August. Okay, so this is how it works. davisparentpower.com is a quick way to get to the website. Okay, there's also a direct link to the enrollment page that I think Mark or Marta, you're going to be able to drop into the chat in a moment. There's a coupon code which is JUN24, and that coupon code until midnight on Sunday will give you that special rate. So your experience when you go onto the event page would be kind of something like this, that you then scroll down the page. Sorry about the jump there. I don't know if you can see that. You have to change the ticket quantity from 0 to 1. Then in this box here, you then type the coupon code you hit return, and you'll then see it reduces the price actually to £294.50. How about that? Okay. And then the same thing will happen if you book a second family member on at half price. It will reduce that price correspondingly as well. Okay. And I would really love to see many of you there. Not more than 24 of you, but many of you. So I'm just going to finish with another quote by Ron Davis. So Ron says, at dyslexia's root is a natural ability, a talent. Dyslexia is not a complexity. It is a compound of simple factors which can be dealt with step by step. I hope we've given you cause to believe that this evening. Seeing is believing, though, and you will see it when you engage with the Davis approach in whatever way is right for you. So thank you all for listening to this formal part of the evening. we're going to take a look at the questions in a moment, and I'm going to invite you. Marta's going to put another poll up as we look at the questions. This poll is going to be basically asking a bit about what you think about what you've heard this evening. Has it been useful? What would you come to another webinar by us? And if so, what out of a range of topics might be interesting to you? Also, there's an opportunity there if you want to immediately sort of benefit from an individualized free consultation with one of our facilitators, the lovely pictures of whom, and let me show you again the pictures of who you'll be talking to if you do that. Okay, so if you want to have a chat with one of these lovely people for up to 30 minutes, completely free, then there's an opportunity to book that using the kind of poll that's currently on the screen. Okay, so then you don't have to do anything else. You just fill that in, and one of us will then be in touch. If you do fill that in and say that you want to talk to somebody, please give us a phone number. Otherwise, we'll be chasing back and forth endlessly on email. So if you're happy to give us just a phone number that we can then use, we'll be sensitive about using it naturally. We'll only use it in order to make contact to get that consultation in place. But that just makes the whole thing much quicker and much easier. Okay. So
and please scroll down the poll.
Yes, it's a much longer one than the previous poll. So keep going until you get to the bottom.
And there was a question about the code, Richard.
About the code?
Yeah, the coupon code.
Do you want me to drop the code into chat again?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So that's in chat. Yeah, we will follow on as soon as after we close the webinar a little bit later on. Then it takes a little while for the video to what I call cook in Zoom to sort itself out. But then we will be in touch, before the close of this evening with all the details. But we're going to be in touch with like everyone, and there are quite a lot more people who registered than are actually here. So, don't sort of delay. Get a head start in getting one of those 24 places if you do want to come and be with me for 6 sessions through August, September, the beginning of August, beginning of October. All right. Okay. So I'm just opening up the Q&A now. We're going to just work through the questions that you've asked us. And then when there are no more questions, then we will close the webinar and we'll open up the coffee meeting again. Okay, so we've got a question. If your child has both dyslexia and dyscalculia, what approach is best to support both learning differences at the same time without overwhelming them? Now, that's a really good question. We have, in Davis, we have 2 separate programs for dyslexia, focusing on reading first and foremost and writing, and for maths, dyscalculia and maths difficulties. If you hard sell, if you get hold of a copy of my book, Counting on Fingers, you'll be able to see in depth how we work on the maths side. The question that you've got as to how to progress, I would say largely depends on your child. Okay, so when I'm working with an individual who has both challenges, then what I want to know is which is the one that is really getting in the way for the child. What's their most keenly felt goal? And in some cases, it's the maths, and then we start working with maths. Maths, by the way, very often is accompanied by difficulties with time awareness and time perception, like I was showing you earlier in the webinar about how we work with time. Yeah. Also, sequential thinking, order versus disorder, perception of cause and effect will often be part and parcel of the way that the person isn't thinking mathematically, hasn't developed the mathematical thinking ability. So our math program goes quite a lot deeper than just looking at maths. But there are also other individuals who, first and foremost, you know, it's really getting in the way for them that they're finding reading and writing difficult. And of course, reading comes into maths as well, because you need to be able to understand and process those story problems, like, you know, John and Frida are digging a swimming pool and their bucket holds so much dirt and so on, you know. So it really depends on the child. We can work either way. Okay, if the child, like all things being equal, we would probably do the dyslexia route first. Yeah. There's a slight ease and elegance to doing it that way around, but we can equally successfully work the other way. Okay, so, but we wouldn't work on both at the same time typically. So I hope that's okay for that. Other than the use of colorful semantics, which we can use to support the children with dyslexia form sentences, can you recommend anything else that will support a child with high functional needs as an addition and struggles with all learning? Now, gosh, that's a really interesting question. The difficulty with that is that there can be multiple things at work. Okay. If you're talking here about a child who struggles with all learning. Okay, so if this is a child who is having difficulty with ideas like cause and effect, yeah, time, sequence, order, disorder, then the difficulties that the child is having with those ideas are going to affect pretty much every academic subject, along with also a bunch of areas of their life and possibly behavior. Okay, so if you think about cause and effect, just the idea that, oh, I dropped my phone. My phone's on the table because I dropped it. Yeah. You know, if that idea of cause and effect isn't a way that I naturally see everything that's going on around me in the world, yeah, then that's going to affect, it's going to stop me learning history. It's going to stop me learning maths. It's going to stop me learning the sciences. It's going to stop me learning geography. It's going to stop me learning how to construct a sentence, because I'm not going to know what's the subject and what's the object. The idea of subject and object is not going to make sense to me. Yeah, if that makes some sort of sense. Yeah, so our starting point in that case would probably be to look at those concepts and to use the plasticine play in order to make models where we're exploring, for example, cause, I'm stepping on the ball, and effect, there's a squashed ball. And then we might have a model where it's kind of like this, and there's an arrow between the two. Simple way of showing the idea of consequence, cause and effect. Okay, we build that up gradually through rich exploration and using the clay. Ron Davis's second book, The Gift of Learning, gives some insight into how we work with this. And then we've got a framework for doing the maths. We've got a framework for analyzing sentences. What they used to call parsing in the olden days. This is the for mastering the idea of subject and the idea of object, the idea of a verb. Okay, but it's likely without that those ideas, so grammatical ideas, are just sort of falling right out of the bottom of the person again. Okay, now in some cases it can be just that the straightforward dyslexia program will be enough. If it's fundamentally first and foremost basically just a problem around reading and writing, then the dyslexia program may be able to sort it. But if it goes deeper than that, and you're saying like struggles with all learning, it may well be that a concepts program would be the way to go. I think that's helpful. Are all dyslexics picture thinkers? How can we tell? Well, I would go further. We are all picture thinkers. Everyone is a picture thinker. If you weren't, you wouldn't recognize your best friend in the street or the way back, all the way to the nearest shop. Okay. But what it's more about is that non-dyslexics will overlay their picture thinking with word thinking much more than dyslexic individuals will. who have a much more direct contact with their mental imagery. Now, picture thinking isn't always like visual picture. It can be tactile. Yeah, okay. I've worked with many individuals who have strong tactile thinking. They can imagine what it would feel like to stroke a cat. They have kinesthetic thinking. They think with movement. They're good at sports or whatever. Okay, but there's always this strong spatial element in there, as opposed to the more sequential, linear way that the word thinking goes. Okay, and the way that you can tell, first and foremost, is because you're going to stumble on words like if and but and when and how. Okay, the little words that you're seeing most. Imagine being at a social function and recognizing everyone at that function except your best friend from childhood. Yeah, that's like how it is when you're reading and you're not recognizing the little words, which were the first words you ever saw when you started to learn to read, and the words that you see most often, and they're still the words that you don't recognize. The only explanation for that, that we've found, is that they don't create a mental picture. So they irritate your picture thinking. They give you a blank picture. So I hope that's enough for that. Thank you, excellent stuff. Could you explain how dyspraxia is caused and how Davis helps this? Yes. And also, is there any homeschooling program you'd recommend while parents aim that their children go through one of the Davis methods? A couple of really interesting questions. So dyspraxia, I have a dyspraxic background myself. I was never diagnosed, but I was the kid that at school that the bottom sports team would have dropped if they could have done, every time. Okay. Don't ask me to put up a set of shelves either. I mean, I probably could do that now, but it's never been an aspiration of mine since the past trauma, if you like, when I was younger. And so when my own personal experience with the Davis program was that what we call the Davis orientation counseling tool, it caused a kind of a subtle shift in my sense of where I was in space around me. I can't say much more than that, other than without going into a load of kind of very technical Davis stuff. But essentially, a dyspraxic individual has something that we call their natural orientation is kind of skewed. It's in a suboptimal location, and the different possible suboptimal locations are causing the more moderate to severe fine or gross motor issues that occur with dyspraxia. And now I win at bowling, and I win at darts, and I win at mini golf with some quite serious competitors. Okay, so I don't win at everything, but those things really, really changed for me after doing Davis. Okay. Oh, sorry, and Diana, sorry, there was another question that you had around a homeschooling-based approach while waiting for a Davis program. We do have a set of, only really on the dyslexia side, but we have a home use kit which you can access from our website. If you go to davismethod.co.uk, if you can't find us, drop us a chat message or an email. Okay, and then that is like a kind of a kit bag that also comes with some training videos that you can use in order to, at a basic level, to engage with the reading and writing side of our work in a kind of a homeschooling environment. My colleague Axel Goodmanson may also be launching a workshop again soon, which is tailored for homeschooling individuals to attend along with their child over a series of 10 weeks in order then to be able to work at home. So what I would say is have a look on the website. If you can't find what you're looking for, drop us a line and we'll guide you from there. Okay. So then I understand the logic behind the reading and the maths mastery, but one thing that really embarrasses my son is his spelling. How can Davis help with that? Yeah, now spelling is a big, it's a kind of a big specialism of mine and of a number of us. Spelling is a much slower process than reading, even in Davis. Because what we tend to see in a Davis dyslexia program is that a person's reading ability, their ease and their accuracy of reading and the level at which they're reading will go up noticeably while you watch, in the course of the week with us. So very often I've got a child who comes in the door on Monday, reading a kind of a basic, what in America they would call a primer or a primer, one of those, a kind of a children's book. Yeah. And if it's a 10-year-old child, they'll be going out at the end of the week, often reading Roald Dahl. If it's a 12-year-old, they'll be reading Philip Pullman. you know, and so on. So within the course of the week, it's going up, up, up. But spelling is much slower because you've still got what we'll do in the week is we'll show you a strategy that works for you to master a word and know that you know the word. But then you've got all the other words left that you don't yet know. I might actually, it's interesting, we could do a whole webinar on that at some point. But essentially what we tend to do is to have Davis at the root of it, combined with gradually, you know, a tailored approach, which could be a combination of visualization, of opening up a Word document with dictate enabled, writing an essay by hand, but hitting dictate in order to see how a word is spelt, any word that you don't know, then copying it, using the Word document to collect those words, then at the end, then using either the clay to master those words, or a platform such as one called Quizlet is one that I quite often use, which has a very visual way of enabling a person to learn a word along with a mental picture of what it means. So there's a kind of a bit of a mix and match, Davis visualization, clever use of assistive technology that we will tend to use there. And then what we then find is over time, a person's spelling builds up. It's easier with a younger child in primary school. They're having spelling tests typically once a week, and then they can just start using the clay for the spelling tests. And then they'll get those words right, and they'll stay right. With a secondary child, we have to be a little bit more creative because there's a bigger build-up of words they don't yet know. So that's where we then tend to use that bigger blend of things. So I hope that was enough of an answer there. What if my child is struggling with auditory processing issue? Will Davis help? Yeah, well, what is auditory processing? Essentially, it's the process by which information from the external world is getting inside of me, okay? It's a kind of a form of disorientation, yeah? In Davis terms, if my mind is not processing accurately what my eyes are seeing, what my ears are hearing, but it's processing what it's creating as if that were reality, then I'll have what the world will see as an auditory processing issue. And we do see then, so the first step is then the Davis orientation tools that give the person a switch that they can then use to turn off a given disorientation instantly when they want to. And then it's a question of habituating the use of the orientation tool. So the person remembers and knows to use it in situations where they need it. So are children with dyslexia visionary, strategic thinkers, and right brainers? Wow. There's a big question. It's probably going a step too far to say that everyone with dyslexia is a visionary and a strategic thinker, but there is a high incidence, for example, of dyslexia among entrepreneurs. Study by Professor Julie Logan in 2007 indicated that the number of dyslexics, that the incidence of dyslexia among entrepreneurs is in the UK is around double what it is in the general population and around 3.5 times what it is in the general population in the US. So in other words, if you're dyslexic, you're more likely to be a successful entrepreneur than if you're not dyslexic. That doesn't mean that everybody will be. Dyslexia is a kaleidoscope of strengths and weaknesses that are always individual to the person who is dyslexic. You always have those core ingredients of picture thinking, disorientation, and low tolerance for confusion at the root. But each person's going to, you know, whether that person becomes a brilliant actor or a brilliant dancer or an artist or a sports person or an architect or an engineer or an entrepreneur or a visionary or a philosopher, or none of the above, yeah, will just depend on, you know, individual factors in that person. So I don't know if that's enough on that. What age can you start Davis? Well, the main programs are designed for children aged 8 and above. We do have specialized programs for children aged 5 to 7. And in the case of nonverbal autism, we can start at 3.5. But generally, it's around about 5, and then the core programs at 8. The oldest I ever worked with was 85. And there are a few facilitators who've worked with. Marta, did you work with someone who was even older than that?
Excuse me, because it
Did
was
I
a glitch.
remember that you worked with someone who was older than?
65 lately. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there's no upper limit. Okay. Do you need to have a diagnosis to use Davis, or would you recommend getting one before starting the program. No, you don't need a diagnosis to do Davis. We have our own criteria for determining whether a program is likely to be suitable for you or for an individual. If you already have a diagnosis, we'll look at it with interest. It'll be useful to us to know, but we don't need you to have one in order for a program to be successful. What are your thoughts on medication, e.g. Ritalin? I personally hate the idea, but it seems to be the only solution to most teachers and therapists' recommendations. Does it really help the child with stopping disorientation? Does this method help take the child off the medication? Essentially, yes, it does. I mean, the medication, you might think of it as a kind of a chemical way of blocking disorientations in an individual. In fact, the problem for us with medication is that if we're giving a person a conscious off switch for their disorientation, and there's also a medical intervention, you've got two things trying to do the same thing at once and potentially interfering with each other. So if it's possible for a person not to be medicated, it's likely that their Davis process is going to be much faster and much more straightforward. Okay. What is important is that if a child has ADHD and they come off medication in order to do Davis, it's kind of going to get worse before it gets better, because the individual is going to be, it takes time for what we're doing to really embed in permanent and lasting behavioral change. What you tend to see after an attention mastery program is subtle changes that then grow into bigger changes. It's like if you plant seeds in a flower bed, you don't expect the sunflowers to grow to be there the next day, but the little green shoots will show you that the sunflowers are coming. And so that's kind of often how it is in an attention mastery program. Okay. Any other resources you would recommend? Websites, podcasts, books? Gosh, where do we start? Blog.dyslexia.com is a good source, a rich source of blog articles. There's a lot of Davis material on YouTube from various sources. Books, Mark mentioned at the beginning, The Gift of Dyslexia, Why Tyrannosaurs But Not If, my book Counting on Fingers. Mark's wife, Anne-Marie, has also written a couple of books now, isn't it, Mark?
She has, yes. One is Healthy Mind, Healthy Body, which is a whole program for young people looking after health and their mind. And the other one is about her experience over the last 18 years called A Bridge Between Two Me's. And they're all available on Amazon as well.
Yeah. Sue Hall's book, Fish Don't Climb Trees, is another really good one. We should probably collate these somewhere. There's quite a range of Davis books, written by our community now. Can you provide more details on the one-to-one program? I'm interested in the parents training, but I believe my son will reject me being the key person to help him. He's 11 and has ADHD as well as dyslexia. So what I would say is, if you said yes to a consultation in the poll, then that's brilliant. We can then put you in touch with somebody. You can have a leisurely half-hour conversation where we can explain kind of more about the one-to-one program. The problem is there are an awful lot of them now. We have a total of 8 different programs, plus combinations of them. So what we'll always be looking to do is to tailor things to, what the exact needs of you or your child, well, your son are. So really the process needs to start with that one-to-one consultation, and then we can kind of advise you from there. Okay, so if you didn't say yes to a consultation in the poll, then Marta, I don't know if you can drop into the chat just the link to the, I think we did earlier, but if you could, the link to the consultation form on our website. Yeah, and then if you just fill that in, then we'll be in touch very quickly. I hope that's enough for now. Okay, if a child is dyslexic in one language, English, can they also be dyslexic in other languages and struggle with reading and writing in other languages? Commonly, yes. I have come across individuals who felt that they were dyslexic in one language but not in another. And it's almost as if in one language you stay above what we call your threshold for confusion, or you stay below it and you're not experiencing a ton of disorientation, but something about the other language causes more confusion, and therefore you cross your tolerance threshold for confusion, you disorientate a lot more. That's the kind of the best way I can explain it. What I've also seen is that individuals who've learned different alphabets, often it's the alphabet they first learned at school is the one where all the disorientation, the triggers are. And if they then, when they're older, as teenagers or adults, learn another alphabet, then sometimes that one doesn't seem to have the same issues. But it's really individual to each person. Okay. What should I do if I have a dyslexic, dyscalculic, and autistic student, high functioning and doesn't want to be helped, isn't motivated and barely cooperates? So what I would say is book a consultation. An autistic individual often does not experience sort of conscious motivation, okay? Because of the nature of what autism is, it can stop a person from formulating goals and having an awareness of and or desire to change. It can make a person even resistant to change. Those of us who are trained as Davis Autism Approach facilitators are also trained in a set of what we call empathy procedures. So before we even meet with your child, we will be using those procedures in order to put ourselves into a state in which a child will feel safe and validated and nurtured, just, independently of anything that we're saying, just by the vibes that they're picking up from us. An autistic individual will very often be highly sensitive to a person's vibes, okay? And what we then tend to find is that we can then gradually build a kind of a motivation bridge through the empathy. So if the person essentially enjoys and likes being in our presence, feels safe and validated, then they will start working with us, and we can then convey our motivation for them to participate fully in the life that they choose for themselves over that empathy bridge. That's kind of the best way I can put it. So again, just book a consultation with us and we'll talk to you. Dyslexia font will be what dyslexia font will be the best for children with dyslexia? Now that's a difficult one, because essentially in Davis, what we're aiming to do is to make all of them okay. So we have a process where, after working in the alphabet in the way that I showed you in the clay, we then explore different fonts and gradually enable a person to desensitize themselves to whatever font it is. Not the weird and wonderful ones, but the typical common fonts. We find that people we work with, they go out the door at the end of the week, and it doesn't really matter what the font is that they're in. Also, the background that the font is on, and so on and so forth. Okay. What do you think of the screening tests for dyslexia in mainstream schools? Do you think they're accurate, and does anyone else feel that schools seem to be reluctant to do these for their children? My son's teacher thinks he's just reluctant. Well, putting my diagnostic assessor's hat on there, some of the computerized screening tests are quite good. So Lucid Exact, my experience of that was, sorry, I shouldn't be advertising a particular one, but it's one that I used as a Senko. And that one was often pretty accurate at picking up, children with needs. Very often the ones done in schools don't include a test of oral reading, speed, accuracy, and fluency. When I do diagnostic assessments, it's almost always there that dyslexia is picked up or is often really obvious, but it wasn't obvious in a school screening if that wasn't included. It's like a person can do masking for reading comprehension, for single word reading, yeah? But when they're then presented with a whole passage that they have to read out loud, that's then when you see the sort of phenomena that I was showing earlier in that sound recording, where you're seeing a person stumbling over the little common words. And you don't see that when they're just presented in a list. You see it when it's in a continuous passage of text. So continuous oral prose reading, speed, accuracy, and fluency is often, and then also working memory and rapid automatized naming are the other tests that I think it's really important for a school to do, because that's often where it is as well. Okay, how do you pinpoint the specific talent or creativity of a dyslexic student or child? Gosh, I'm not sure how to go with that. How do you pinpoint the specific talent or creativity? Well, it's kind of usually obvious. It's just what the person develops as being really good at, and usually at being better than everyone else. Mark, you got your hand up. You're telling me to stop because it's 9 o'clock.
No, I was going to say, I found out what mine was.
Ah, perfect.
Um,
Please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I was lucky when I was nearly 15. Our summer holidays is 3 months in Ireland. And my father put me working on the carberries for the summer. And I suddenly realized, even though for the last 14 years I was told I was stupid, I was actually very good at maths, very good at figuring things out. And so I know my specialty is now, if somebody gives me figures and all, I can do a P&L account within about 60 seconds in my head. So I know mine is figures.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, but it's sometimes by accident you might find out what you're really good at compared to what people are telling you you're not good at.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's often intuitive, isn't it? It's that you talk about speed. There's a story in Ron Davis's book, The Gift of Dyslexia, a little story called The Gifted Vintner, which is about a boy in a family who owned a vineyard who came to Ron for a program, and he could tell, I think, just by looking at the grapes or touching them, which were the ones that were in the perfect condition for for harvesting.
Yeah, and that's what happened to me in that when we used to ring off the tills in the evening, I used to be running the T-bar late at night. I could write the figure for the sales of T-bar before they even counted the money and did a reading. And only then when you're told how great you are, you suddenly realize you're not stupid. Actually, you can do things that other people can't do.
That's the upside of disorientation. Yeah.
Yes.
If you're an disorientation expert, sometimes you'll be the kid with their hand up fastest, or the person quicker than everyone else to get there. But in other areas, it's going to go the other way. That's Thanks, Mark. That was really helpful. What are the common accommodations for dyslexia and dyscalculia in school? Dyslexia, it's often, well, for both, it's often extra time. Is the kind of the bedrock. Yeah. You can also have supervised rest breaks in some cases, which are, if you don't qualify for extra time, then the rest breaks can be a thing that is easier to kind of get for you. On the dyslexia side, you might have reading aids ranging from a reading pen to an electronic reader to a human reader reading for you, a scribe or a computer with a spell checker, or a computer without a spell checker if it's just a handwriting difficulty. Okay. And in Ireland, Mark, you're saying it's a reader, a writer, and
so you get a reader or as a scriber, so you can actually read talk your answers out to someone. And also, if you are diagnosed, and you also can get off a language such as Irish. So you only have doing everything in English, and you don't have to any languages. But you do, and also the Leaving Cert is on and Junior Cert is on in Ireland at the moment. You can actually do it in a room on your own if you suffer from anxiety because of being dyslexic or dyspraxic or autistic. So there are other conditions or aids that schools will help out with.
Yeah. Dyscalculia, there's virtually nothing in my experience, because you can't have a dyscalculia accommodation for a maths exam, because that would, the whole point of a maths exam is showing how you can do maths. So it kind of, it isn't entirely fair, perhaps, that, in subjects like physics and chemistry, you also have to do calculations, and there's no mathematical accommodations that I'm aware of for something like that. Working memory, though, often goes hand in hand with dyslexia and dyscalculia, and that's part of the basis then on which extra time would be given. What if the student doesn't struggle with reading at all, reads smoothly, but his spelling is terrible? A lot of mistakes, missing letters. I've only once had a client where that was the case, who genuinely read smoothly, didn't make mistakes, and understood easily what she was reading, but her spelling was very problematic. Just once in 20 years. And in the case of that girl, her maths was also very difficult. And the key to her spelling was in sequence, that she wasn't processing the concept of sequence properly. Okay, so then when we worked through that, then that started to become a bedrock for her maths and for her spelling. Because I've only had that one case, I can't really comment beyond that. Marta, have you had other such cases? No. Okay. So I'm not sure if this is an appropriate question for this webinar, but I'm interested in knowing if and how you at Davis could help someone learn how to structure a written piece of work, such as emails or essays, if they were diagnosed with dyslexia later in life. So something that I have done is a kind of a multi-step process where we would start with the plasticine clay. I've got a picture of this somewhere, but I think it's going to take too long to find it. And it's like you can, if you start by gathering your ideas that you want to express in the written piece of work, and then make a little mini model for each idea that you want to express. And the mini model doesn't have to be really accurate, but it needs to be something that you'll recognize when you look at it. It's, oh, that was that idea. Yeah. And then you make one after another these little mini models, and they're like little chess pieces, each one representing an idea. And then we go and we get a set of dinner plates and we lay them out. And each dinner plate becomes a paragraph of the essay. And you can then experiment with putting different pieces on different plates until you've got the flow, you know, is feeling like the way that you want it to feel like, and then you write it. But then once you've done that, you know, you don't want to do that for every essay you ever write. So that would just be to kickstart that process of, you know, ideas dump followed by ordering it. Then you can, a good piece of equipment can be electronic mind mapping. So programs like on a Mac MindNode or FreeMind, where you can easily create nodes. You can drop ideas, do an initial dump, move them around in the electronic mind map as you want to, then potentially print it out, number it, and then you're just writing by numbers, as it were. So some people will use visual mind maps for that process, and then, you know, draw them and then just number each node. You can also get courses on academic writing. WordScope is a course I've come across offered at the University of Salford that's been extremely popular. And also one of our Davis facilitators, Amanda Bergstrom, offers another program that is closely aligned to WordScope. But the other thing that a person may sometimes need is the concepts. And I keep talking about concepts, but using the clay to master these ideas like time, sequence, order versus disorder. If you feel like you just can't think in that way, whatever aids you try to use, you're just not thinking in the way that enables you to do this, then the concepts are going to be the answer. Okay. And do you think the colored overlays really work? I think they do. They do what they purport to say. I've seen that again and again. They will make an individual. They will increase a person's ease with reading. In my experience, they're not the solution to a problem. I've never experienced an individual who a colored overlay, you know, they had a colored overlay and that was that. It was more that it made a significant difference. What we think is going on is that it's raising a person's what we call threshold for confusion so that they can tolerate more confusion without disorientating. Okay, it just increases that ease that much so that the disorientations are not happening so much. I have had a few individuals who, after their Davis program, had sort of experimented with color overlays and afterwards were then kind of comfortable without them. It's only been a few individuals, so I don't want to, like, you know, sort of say this is always going to be the case. But yeah, so essentially they do what they say they do, which is palliative, essentially. And for that, it seems to work, in my experience. I have grade 4 students, spelling excellent, but comprehension goes from average to bad, and even their reading speed do not pick. In fact, it goes down, moving backwards despite all efforts. So what I would really recommend would be come and get some training from us. The Gifted Dyslexia Workshop is a workshop where you can learn over 5 days, kind of the full basic range of the Davis techniques. And if their reading speed isn't picking up, but it's going down, it sounds like that there's a mismatch between the reading techniques being used and how those particular individuals naturally think and learn, which will probably be different from the way all the other kids are learning or students that it's worked for. Okay, so again, if you can't find what you're looking for on the website, if you book a consultation with us, we'll be able to kind of guide you on what you can do, you know, as a teacher or a professional with us in order to, you know, to make a difference there. And I think that's the last of our open questions. And thank you for that abundance of questions this evening. Sorry, Mark, you wanted to come in.
Just to say, remind people about the code for the Davis parenting course. We've sold it. Some of them have been sold now. So if anybody wants to get in there, the code is June 24.
Yes.
JUN 24.
Yeah. So there's the easy address to go to. But there's also in the chat the address to the actual kind of like booking page, I think. Then if you go in there, you can you go through to the booking, put in that coupon code when you get to checkout, and that will then reduce the cost down for you. Okay, and we've got one more question. Will training to become a facilitator be available in Ireland? It is available in Ireland because the training is done on Zoom. But it's a really special, there's Zoom and there's Zoom. And so the training that we do is Zoom with whistles and bells. So it's not like watching a PowerPoint. It's hands-on interactive learning. But since during COVID, we learned how to use Zoom in a really clever way that you can get hands-on experiential career training from us through this medium. Okay, and that means you can be anywhere in a kind of within a similar time zone to me here in Malvern, and you can access the training. So again, drop us a line. We can talk you through the process for that. And thank you all for being with us this evening. I did promise that we're going to have a coffee meeting, and I know we've been in the webinar much longer than I thought we were going to be because you had so many questions, which I love and which is great. We're going to keep faith with you with the coffee meeting, okay? We're still going to do that, but I'm going to just drop the address. I'm going to try to drop the address into the chat.
It is in the chat.
It is in the chat. Did you just put it in, Marta?
Yep.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay, so if you want to join us for an informal face-to-face chat, that's where you go. Okay, and then when you see that brown button that says join the coffee meeting, actually the page might look slightly different, but you look for a button that says join the coffee meeting. You click on that button and it will open up an ordinary Zoom meeting, and that's where we'll be waiting for you. Okay, so just make sure that if you want to join the coffee meeting, make sure you've got that link. We'll be there for about half an hour for anyone who wants to come. Okay, and I'm going to be closing the webinar in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.